Welcome to Humane Voices, the official podcast of Humane World for Animals. I'm Chad. There's Kelly. What's up, Kelly?
Hey, Chad. How are you?
Good. So we're talking about disaster prep. I think a lot of people don't prep in the right ways for their pets or even themselves. Does that sound right?
That sounds right. It's one of those things until it happens, you don't think about it.
Well, and we've got two experts on the show to talk about everything we need to do, their experience. They've been to so many deployments over the years, rescuing pets and wildlife and getting them back home and healthy and safe. Our guests today are Adam Periscindola, Vice President of the Animal Rescue Team, and Celia Jackson, Program Director for the Disaster Response at Humane World for Animals. Thanks, everybody. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Hi. Good to have you both. I'm excited to hear about this topic, Chad. And we kind of touched upon it. The people forget to until it happens. So give us a little context. When there's pets that or animals that have to be rescued, like how does that occur? Did people just forget to plan? Did they neglect to? Share a little bit about that. Adam, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I don't think that people necessarily forget to plan. I think there's a lot of confusion. There's not always great communication about what the options are for people with their pets. And so it can be hard to find information on if they're going to evacuate ahead of time, where they can go, that they can bring their animals. And then, during the disaster, when people are trying to get out, there's often like a confusion. I mean, we've definitely seen a lot more during disasters that rescue boats and rescue teams will allow animals in, right? Like back to my first big disaster, which was Katrina in 2005.
Which was the disaster of all disasters. I mean, that was certainly one that sticks out in everybody's mind, right?
Certainly, yeah, definitely. And I think it, did a lot to actually push forward this issue of animals and disasters, because the rescue boats were not allowing people to bring their animals. So you can imagine people stuck on rooftops with their kids and their animals had a real heartbreaking choice to make. Do they stay with their animals and leave their, family at risk, or do they, decide they need to take the boats and leave their animals behind? So, I think that most people, want to be prepared and want to take their animals, but it's just, they just don't have the information about how to do that.
So you guys both have deployed to a ton of disasters over the years. It's stuff like wildfires, hurricanes, and floods. Is there something that sticks in your mind about specific personal stories that you've encountered during your deployments to disasters over the years?
For me, one of the most impactful responses that I've been to, just a couple of years ago when I first started with Humane World for Animals, there was a really enormous earthquake in Turkey, and I had the opportunity to go. And there's something really unique about earthquakes that, in the U.S., we don't necessarily always. It's been a long time since we've seen an earthquake.
Knock wood.
At the scale. Yeah, knock on wood. I'm from Seattle, and so it's something that Seattle people think about a lot, but maybe isn't always the top disaster that we think of. And Adam mentioned just not having the time always to take your pet with you or to know what to do. And in an earthquake, especially, there are people who had to jump out of second, third story windows and leave their pets behind because there just wasn't any time. So when we were there was a lot of we did a lot of reuniting pets with people, because that in particular, I think the less notice you have, the more likely you're going to have some pets left behind in a disaster. And in particular, there was a time we were looking for some animals, and we came across Turkish National Guard folks, and we thought, oh no, they were beginning to lock down the scene out there, and they had us roll down our window, and we thought, oh gosh, we're going to have to get our passports out, and I don't know where mine is. I think it's back at camp, and they were pretty intimidating, but we've discovered through Google Translate they just wanted cat food. So there was a collapsed building across the street, and they had been feeding the cats that were there. And so we came back with a bunch of cat food and gave it to them. And that was just a really good reminder of how important this issue is just across the world. And in a disaster, you think, okay, humans first. And of course, that's true for health and safety. But I think animals really represent hope and recovery and kind of, some silver linings if you can protect the animals.
I love
Absolutely.
that. And so here you have guardsmen that are concerned about the kittens, the cats.
Hmm.
That's great. And I think you bring up something too. I want to make sure folks know that we are global. I mean, we're doing rescue operations around the world. Adam, what about you? Any particular rescue operation that sticks out in your mind?
One for me that was, really profound was we responded to me and my colleague responded to the British Virgin Islands after Hurricane Irma, and I think it really, goes to show that even with like a small amount of help can mean so much for people who are really suffering. So it was really only two of us who went there as soon as after Irma hit. So it was a category 5. They had well over 200-mile-per-hour winds registered on Tortola Island, which is the main island there. And we took a flight in from Puerto Rico to get there. And when we were flying in, I just never seen anything like that at that point. Unfortunately, now we've seen several of these massive hurricanes, but it looked like a bomb had gone off on the whole island. I mean, there was just everything was flattened and there was just debris everywhere. And it's really the scope of it was so immense. And we spent 4 weeks on the island after the hurricane, and there was really just the two of us, but we were working with some of the locals there. There was a small rescue. The shelter had been destroyed and we were trying to get the animals and get them to safety and just help people who are trying to evacuate with their animals. So a lot of people were evacuating. There's no power for like at least 4 weeks,
Oh my
I think
gosh.
was when it was just starting to come back when we were getting ready to leave, and the airport wasn't open for 3 of those weeks, so it was really, for me, it was really profound because I had never responded on an island like that. And there are a lot of lessons to be learned because when a big disaster hits an island, the ports are destroyed, the airport is destroyed. And there's really it's very hard to get supplies there because there's nowhere for ships to dock, right? If the ports have been destroyed. And so all of the rental cars in the island had been in the lowlands. They were all flooded. So there were no vehicles. People were lending us their personal vehicles to go around. And but just the way the island got together and responded was really inspiring to me. I mean, everyone was helping. It was these folks that were, normally working on these hundreds of thousands, if not $1 million yachts, taking out these charter fishing folks and everything, and they were down there, draining diesel fuel from all of the boats that had been destroyed to provide diesel for the generators on the island. And a lot of people who were in the sort of high finance fled the island, leaving mostly, the working staff and the locals. And it was just really inspiring to see how everyone pulled together and was able to, keep things going until they were able to rebuild at least enough to get help in from outside.
I remember that footage, Adam. I think it was you and Chris Schindler. Is that right? Going around the island.
Yeah,
And, oh
that's
my
right.
gosh,
Yeah.
it was just destruction everywhere and just massive boats turned on their side and piled up. It was crazy.
Yeah, there is one picture I took that was a boat literally on the roof of a restaurant.
Oh
I mean,
my
a
gosh.
giant boat on the roof of a restaurant. It was crazy. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, how do you all? So, when you go into an area, I mean, how do you coordinate with on the ground folks? What partners are you working with? I mean, just even in that example, it sounds like you have community members helping, but how do you even help and assist and do it in some efficient or productive way?
In that situation, so we had made very very basic contact with some folks, and we basically showed up with backpacks and tents, and we had no idea where we were staying, what we were going to do. The person we were supposed to be meeting then got very ill, wasn't available to meet us, so we just showed up on this beach. We heard that the community was coming together at 6 p.m. and we kind of showed up there, and they there was a woman that worked as a realtor, and she, they actually had all of these massive mansions that were empty because people had fled before the hurricane and allowed her the use of them. So some of these were destroyed, but some were intact. So we were able to stay there. And then we just slowly met, this person who runs this. I mean, like I said, the shelter was destroyed. We couldn't find any of the people involved with the shelter. But then there was a group that does spay neuter, just a couple of people. We hooked up with them. They hooked us up with the vet clinic, and it just kind of went from there.
So it sounds like
that's our typical response.
Organized chaos. That just sounds, like a lot. But you've got the expertise that you could show up blindfolded and probably make a lot of progress.
Yeah. It took a little bit of cobbling things together, but we really made it happen. And then Maria hit while we were there. And so we were able to get all the animals out of the destroyed shelter into the vet clinic, which when I say a vet clinic, I'm sure people are picturing like a vet clinic, like, you go to your local vet clinic, but it's basically in a garage, it's like a clinic built out of a garage, but we were able to reinforce it and at least get the animals safe. And we ended up getting a lot of animals off the island, both the animals that were from the shelter that we were able to remove because they were going to have to rebuild, and then animals for people that either had evacuated or were evacuating but weren't able to take their animals and then get them reunited back in the States. Yeah.
And Celia, if you can talk a little bit about maybe some of the kind of agencies or emergency partners that you work with on the ground, but even before then, how do you get people to respond and care about the animals when you're in a situation where there's just, so much devastation and humans that need things?
Everyone I think cares about the animals, but how do you get those resources directed? And what we often find is, while animals are often written into emergency plans because we have the Pets Act in the United States after Katrina, sometimes those are just a line item. And there's not necessarily a plan around incorporating animal services into the response itself, such as, a lot of all emergency management agencies conduct exercises and drills and tabletops. And whether or not the animal services folks are directly involved in that depends on emergency managers. Some do really care about animals and they're very proactive, but then some don't quote me on this, but some people don't like animals. And so they just, they don't think about it, and it's not a priority.
We don't need to hear that. That can't be
true. And so there's a lot of pre-work that has to happen, I think, for a successful response. And part of that is we do preparedness training and we do public outreach and we do things like this in order to bring attention to the importance and encourage partners that we have who are local to the area to get involved and advocate and try and empower those folks to have a presence in emergency management. Because if they can get somebody in the emergency operations center and listening in and giving feedback and telling the folks who are running the response what's needed for animals, it's much more likely that they'll be able to bring in resources and focus attention on that. And that's kind of where we come in. So we never, in the United States especially, we never respond without a partner that we're coming in under to support. And so that partner to bring us in also needs the support of emergency management. Once we get on the ground and we have that connection with them, we can get things mobilized pretty quickly. But there is a lot of relationship building as well that happens on the front end that makes that happen, that makes that possible.
And that partnership you're talking about, that's probably a local group, or no? That maybe they're based in Florida where the incident happened, where the disaster happened. Is that correct? Or could it be another national large group?
I mean, usually they're local shelters or local agencies or state agencies. So disasters always start locally. So wherever it happens, whoever is closest to that disaster or impacted that has jurisdiction are in charge. And then as things expand, who's responsible will expand as well. So, and depending on the size of the disaster, we'll always start with whoever has a local jurisdiction there. But for really big events, when there's national, like FEMA's involved, and we've got all the national groups involved, then we all coordinate together. We coordinate very closely with other organizations at the national level, and FEMA, Department of Ag, So we all come to the table and make sure that our services aren't overlapping and that we all know who we're helping, because typically we might have a shelter that we're really close to. Another organization might have another shelter that they're really close to. And so we're directing our resources in that way.
But you mentioned pre-planning, and so I think that's important to talk about, that you don't just show up and say, "We're Humane World for Animals," and start picking out puppies and kittens. I mean, there's a lot of misconceptions out there, and that may be one of them potentially. I mean, you're doing work often and long before disasters even hit, right? Can you speak to that a little bit?
We, like I said, have a lot of preparedness training that we offer. We might be a lot. So, for instance, if an organization wants some sort of preparedness training, they'll come to us and we'll go down there and we'll get in touch and we'll meet partners through that training. We also have our state affairs program and we have our Pets for Life program. And we have a lot of other programs that interact with shelters, and they're also building those relationships for us. And so when something happens, we usually have proactively built relationships in some way. And even if we don't have those, honestly, like even if we don't necessarily have partnerships, we can still reach out and say, hey, this is who we are and this is what we do. And like, is there anything that you need? Because, that also happens quite frequently.
So this isn't, you guys aren't napping on the sunny days when there's no disaster. This is a 365 sort of job. Is that right?
Oh yeah, there's always something going on. And that's a good point, because the recovery work can be many months to a year or more years. So even when we're not responding, we're still actively supporting recovery work, working with shelters. If they're rebuilding, we can help with that. There's a lot of, even in places like, Western North Carolina, there's still a need for supplies and there's still people who need help. And so we're involved for the long run. So yeah, like we're always working on some disaster, whether it's happening today or it happened last month. So
yeah, and I think the other part to that is that we also work on, obviously, kind of reducing the risk or mitigating, especially in areas where there are, disasters that occur year after year in the same places. So a lot of the work by our team in India on, kind of flood response and flood mitigation work is really for preparing. We know every year those communities are going to flood. So, we need to help them plan and have a place where people are going to go, where they can take their animals, and then kind of socialize that to the community, educate the community about that. And also, we also are always trying to bring this message of animals, the importance of addressing animals in disasters, to a variety of different forums. So whether that's, in the US, different disaster management conferences, or globally, the UN disaster risk reduction conferences and those platforms, because, we, as animal groups are the ones that have to kind of drive that message home, that like assisting people during disasters means that, you need to assist their pets, right? Like, even if they don't care, I mean, most people care about animals, but even if their remit is not animals, in order to really fully assist people during disasters, you have to address their animals, and there could be economic reasons, emotional reasons, right? We all know that bond is really strong between humans and animals. And there have been studies that show that people's personal trauma from being affected by disasters is compounded if they were forced to leave their animals behind or they lost their animals during that process. So, there's a lot of reasons that these humanitarian groups and humanitarian platforms need to be accounting for animals during disasters as well.
And you said, you both, I think, have touched on this, that you are often training people, training government agencies, training organizations in areas. So part of that pre-work. So even if you're not at a disaster, that you have provided resources and training so that they can respond. Sometimes on social media, we will have people that'll say, well, there's this disaster going on. Why aren't you there? Where is Humane World? Can you speak a little bit to that? Kind of what's the response?
what I would say to that is we're always there in some capacity, even if it's virtually there to support partners. We're never not doing nothing, but we just may not always be in need for a physical boots on the ground field team. However, there's always a need. And so we're always active in communication and coordination. We're active on the National Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster group, and we often fulfill partner needs through that avenue, which is the other national organizations that are providing services, not necessarily in the animal world, but that do more humanitarian, human-based work. But they often will hear of things and they'll funnel them to us, and we'll funnel them to the right people, or we'll help ourselves. And so we're always present in some form or fashion. But I think it's something that might be important for people to know, is that sometimes the most effective way for helping isn't necessarily boots on the ground. It's supporting partner shelters and supporting the local responders who are there, doing a lot of hard work, but may not necessarily need extra bodies, because we don't want to become a burden for the local response. When you send people to a disaster, it takes up resources and it takes up time, and you need a place to stay. You need resources, and so so if there's a way for us, if that's not the best way for us to help, then we're not going to impose ourselves, right? So, but there's always ways that we can help and that we do help.
Popping up some of the local groups, and that may, Adam, be whether it's direct resources, support, providing food, or even, your expertise, counsel. It sounds like there's a variety of ways that you're engaging in a disaster.
Yeah, I think that's true. And one of the most rewarding things, I think, for us is when we hear back from, either a group or a jurisdiction where we've worked with them. And, they're always proud to tell us, for example, in Mexico, our team down there has done a lot of work with some of the coastal communities that are hit by hurricanes on a regular basis. And they've done a lot of work, particularly around the idea of co-sheltering, right? So helping them figure out how they can set up shelters where people can bring their animals with them. And so this last hurricane that hit a few weeks ago, they immediately emailed our team manager, and they were so excited to tell them that they had set up all of these, co-sheltering facilities. And so, it's really rewarding because while we're always ready to respond to disasters, we love it if we're not needed, right? If we can build up the capacity for the local places to respond, then that's the best outcome.
Well, then you can check that off the list and say, they've got this. Now we can go over.
Right. And that way we're kind of reserving our, resources. And as Celia pointed out, the burden that, we put on the community by just having extra people in there at a time when resources are scarce for those situations where the need truly outstrips what the locals are able to handle. And situations like the earthquake in Turkey, in Antakya, where we were, which destroyed, entire city of 500,000 people, right? So it was a massive response that was required, and, we were able to respond. But if we can help the locals so that they can respond somewhere, then that's great. We'll focus our attention on where we're truly needed.
I think a lot of what people hear you guys talk about, and I think they think it's mostly or all dogs and cat rescue stuff. But Adam, you've been in the field long enough that you've probably touched every single kind of animal in disasters possible. Is that right? I remember Australia just a few years ago that you were carrying injured koalas.
Yeah. I mean, we do get a lot of, first of all, in some places, as we all well know, there can be a large variety of animals that people have as pets. So,
Right.
Sometimes you get called somewhere and you're a little bit surprised at what the pet animals are. But certainly, I think, the three-quarters categories I think of course, pet animals that can be large animals like horses, or small animals like dogs and cats and hamsters and gerbils and birds. And and then livestock. So especially, outside of the United States and a lot of the places where we respond, these are small villages, and they have, each family or the community has their sort of subsistence animals, whether they're cows or goats or chickens. And a lot of the response will be around, helping those animals. For example, when I responded to the Nepal earthquake in 2015, these are little villages up in the Himalayas, and many of them were just like a family with their cow that, that's where they get their milk, that's how they survive. And, and if their cow is injured, then it's very difficult for them. And then, of course, a situation like Australia, which was a little unique for us. I don't think I'd ever seen a koala, certainly not outside of a zoo before I did that response on Kangaroo Island. But in general, to be not just the fact that the species was different, right? A koala, which luckily they're very amenable to be handled, right? They're not really difficult animals in that way. But I think also just the response in general in terms of responding to, a wildlife population is not something that we see very often, or we do very often in the United States and many other places in the world. So it was a really unique experience to see and to learn from it in terms of rescuing these animals, and if they were able to be rehabilitated and re-released, and how the habitat has now recovered. To what extent can it maintain the population of koalas that were re-released? So it was a really interesting response.
Cecilia, besides maybe holding koalas, and I'm sure you have lots and lots of stories, probably many tough ones, but I imagine too some really emotional reunifications where maybe you've rescued an animal and brought them back to their family. Anything that sticks out you can share with listeners?
I I mean, this one wasn't, I was involved in the first half into the second half, but Adam, I don't know if you remember there was a woman in Turkey, in Antakya, who had to jump out of her building and she had an orange tabby that she left behind. And we looked for like days and days and days for this cat. And eventually the team encountered it, and she flew back. So she had broken like both legs, and she was in pretty bad shape. She was held, I think she was like a medevac to Istanbul. So she came back to reclaim her cat. And I just can't imagine the emotions of that experience, and just not knowing if you're ever going to see your animal again, who's a member of your family, and an animal that you protect and care for on a day-to-day basis, and to like have to leave and not know what's happening, and have your own battles to fight health wise, and to come back and be able to reclaim your family member it's overwhelming. Whenever we see that, it really brings home the mission and the importance that animals, like the animal human bond, like how strong it is, and how important animals are in our lives. And for those of us with animals, like it really touches me. Like every time I think about something like that, it kind of makes me a little teary, because I can put myself in their shoes pretty easily. Those moments are pretty incredible.
Is that what keeps you going, Adam? Hoping for those moments where you can keep pets and families together? I mean, this is tough. It's got to be tough.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you have a situation like the earthquake in Turkey, it's heartbreaking, because we met many people who lost multiple family members. 50,000 people died. It was pretty horrific situation. So those moments of, joy are really like valued by everyone, everyone from us as the responders, the owners, the National Guard, the police, anyone who sort of witnesses it, right? Like people want to kind of take that, that joy where they can. And I think for me, one of the big sort of, situations I remember was during Katrina, and maybe because it was my first big disaster, where we were working out of a large temporary shelter in Lamar Dixon, was an agricultural center. And there was a couple that had come to volunteer there, and they had come to volunteer because they had been on vacation, and they had left their cat, like their tenant who lived on the bottom floor was caring for their cat. And when the flood came, he ended up having to leave like on a canoe or something, but he couldn't find the cat. So he had left the cat, he'd left like food and water, but of course they came back as soon as they could, but citizens weren't being allowed into New Orleans. And so they were just desperately asking everyone, who was going out, would you check for our cat? So I said, yeah, of course, I definitely will. And so we made it a point that day, I was like, here's somebody, the people are here. We had so many animals at Lamar Dixon that couldn't track down the owners. I mean, there are thousands of animals. I thought, here's one cat. If I get it, these people are going to be here and they're going to take this cat home. So we went there, and, we found a way in the back. We could kind of wade through the water and get in, and eventually found the cat. I think he was hiding under the bed, and brought him back. And these folks were so emotional. They actually owned a bar on Bourbon Street. So they kept telling me, oh, you have to come, come. And never closed their bar, by the way, the whole time. And he kept telling me, you got to get a hotel because you won't be able to walk, you won't be able to drive. You'll barely be able to walk, because I'll give you all the free drinks. I mean, I didn't take him up on it, but it's very sweet. But they were very, very, they were just really emotional. And I heard about 3-4 months ago, I got a message on Facebook from the woman in the couple, and she was just like, oh, you probably don't remember us, but we had this cat that you rescued, and he's since passed on, of course, because he wasn't young at the time either, and they now have another cat. And it was very sweet, and she just wanted to check in with me, and I thought, well, of course I remember your cat. Like, it was the best thing out of the whole response for me, was that being able to reunite them with their cat.
Oh, that's amazing. That's incredible. I'm sure, but you did so much good work at, all these disasters, but Katrina was so obviously huge. Anyway, let's wrap this up. So for anybody out there who wants to help or who wants to get involved in your work and helping, what can they do right now to make sure their own pets or the animals in their community are safer when disaster strikes?
I would start by just talking to your friends and family about how important it is, and demonstrating that for your own household. Get that kit together. We all think, every time a disaster happens, everyone thinks, well, I didn't think that would happen to me. I thought that was something that happens to other people.
Yeah.
And so that's how you get caught off guard. So if you want to be part of the solution, being prepared yourself is the first step. And then, once that's done, maybe you're in a better position to help others as well. And then advocating for pets, call your local emergency management agency and ask what their plan is. Or maybe volunteer at your local animal shelter, because they can always use volunteers regardless, and build a relationship that way, and ask them what their plan is, and if they're connected, and that you want to be involved.
That's great. And so, Adam, are there supplies you should have on hand, or things you should think about checklist wise, or?
Yeah, I think, number one, before I think we even get to supplies, is I definitely recommend everyone to microchip their animals.
Oh, gosh,
we saw that in Turkey. They had a law that required animals to be microchipped. And that was the number one way we were able to get animals back to their owners was through this microchip system. So microchips are amazing. Of course, current on vaccinations, it's good to have a copy of the vaccination records, because if you're going to a co-sheltering facility or even a temporary shelter, if you take your animal to, they're going to want some vaccination information. So that's always good. Of course, you want to have the basics, something to put the animal in. We saw this after Ukraine, people coming across the border with all sorts of, homemade carriers, quite like a lot of laundry baskets used in ways and quite ingenious, but some way that you're going to be able to, if it's a small animal, put it in some kind of carrier. If it's a larger animal, make sure you have obviously a leash and collar. And then of course, like food bowls, and I would Make sure you're prepared to take some of their food with them as well when you go. But yeah, I think those are kind of key. Celia, can you think of anything? Celia's actually been working on putting these together for the LA area for our recovery efforts there. But yeah.
Oh, yeah, I know. I mean, those are all super critical. Especially, things like having a recent picture of you and your pet together, just in case to prove ownership. And don't forget about, comfort items for your pet. If there's a toy or a blanket or something that they're really attached to, maybe that's not something you put in your kit, but that's something that you have flagged as like, we're going to bring that item with us. I I really like one thing we're putting in our preparedness kits is, at least this round, is a licky mat. So you can put peanut butter on it, or you can put snacks on it to keep your cat or dog occupied. I use one for my cat all the time. I put churro on it. That'll entertain him for like an hour. So definitely, if you end up evacuated in an emergency shelter or even like a hotel room, your pet might be more confined than it's used to. So enrichment activities and like enrichment items, I think is maybe not the most critical thing on the list, but I think it goes a long way towards making the experience less stressful for everybody. So that's one of my tips is to include some activities for your pets if you can in practice. I will say, like, I have a very energetic husky. He does not like to be in a kennel. It's not his favorite thing. So we have to train with him just in case that ever does happen. And so I also recommend folks, practice your emergency plan, just like you would a fire escape drill or an evacuation drill. Include your pets in that, and it'll feel less overwhelming in real time.
I think that's a great kind of final word on that too. I mean, have, with your family, talk about what would you do, kind of have those items ready, but make sure everybody's communicating. That's really great. And I mean, I've learned some things today, and while it's been great to see you all and share, I hope I never see you in person, of course.
Well, Adam and Celia, thank you so much for all this great information. We really appreciate it. And we will see you next time on Humane World for Animals, on Humane Voices. That's the name of this podcast, is Humane Voices. I really screwed that up there. Anyway, see you guys next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.